The night was unusually still on the wide Texas plains, the kind of silence that pressed heavy on a man's chest when he was alone. Ethan, the lonely rancher, sat on the worn wooden porch of his small cabin, staring into the distance where the moonlight painted the rolling fields in silver. His life had become one long stretch of quiet days and quieter nights after years of tending cattle, fixing fences, and burying his memories. There was no one left to listen to his words, no one to share his bread or his laughter. He had grown used to the emptiness, or at least he thought he had, until that strange sound broke through the midnight calm, a faint cry, almost a whisper carried by the wind. He frowned, rising to his feet, his boots thudding on the porch. The sound came again, clearer this time. "Please, see broken bar, help me." His heart jolted. It wasn't the wind, it wasn't his imagination, it was a woman's voice, weak and desperate, drifting from the direction of his barn. Ethan grabbed the lantern by the door, its flickering light barely holding back the shadows, and marched across the dusty yard. His pulse quickened, though he didn't know why. He had lived years without anyone calling his name, and now, suddenly, someone out there needed him. When he pushed open the barn doors, the smell of hay and old wood wrapped around him, but beneath it was something else: fear, sweat, and the coppery tang of blood. He lifted the lantern higher, scanning the corners, and that's when he saw it, a large burlap sack, half hidden behind a stack of hay bales. The sack was trembling ever so slightly, as though something or someone was inside. Ethan's breath caught in his throat. Slowly, cautiously, he stepped closer, the wooden floor creaking beneath him. He crouched and pressed his hand against the rough fabric, and at once, a muffled voice whispered, "Please help me." Broken bar. His blood ran cold. With shaking fingers, he tugged at the knot that bound the sack shut. It was tight, cruelly tied, as though whoever had put her in here had wanted to erase her from the world. After a struggle, he ripped it loose, and the sack fell open. His lantern's glow revealed the young woman curled inside, her face streaked with dirt and tears, her wrists raw from rope marks. She blinked up at him, her lips quivering as if afraid to speak too loudly. Ethan froze. In all his years of loneliness, he had never imagined a moment like this. A stranger, broken and pleading, dropped into his life like some grim gift of fate. Her eyes, though swollen and red, carried a glimmer of life, a silent plea for safety. Ethan swallowed hard. "You're safe now," he murmured, though he had no idea if that was true. He reached out, offering his rough, calloused hand, and after a trembling pause, she placed her fragile fingers in his palm. He pulled her gently to her feet, steadying her when her knees buckled. She was light, far too light, as if hunger and fear had hollowed her out. She leaned against him, her breath shallow, and for the first time in years Ethan felt something stir inside his chest, a sense of purpose, a burning need to protect. He didn't know who she was or why she had been left like this, but he knew one thing with absolute certainty: she had come to him for a reason, and he would not let her suffer. One Ethan half carried, half guided the trembling young woman toward his cabin, the lantern light swaying across the dusty yard as if trying to chase away the night's cruel secrets. She was shivering, not from the autumn chill but from something deeper, a fear etched into her bones. Her steps faltered, and every few moments she cast a nervous glance over her shoulder, as though she expected shadows to spring to life and drag her back. Ethan noticed it, but he didn't press her with questions. There would be time for answers later. Right now, she needed warmth, safety, and a moment to breathe. Inside the cabin, the air smelled of wood smoke and old pine. The small hearth still glowed with embers from his earlier fire, and Ethan stoked it back to life, the flames leaping eagerly as if sensing their duty. He set the woman down in the worn armchair by the fire, wrapping a heavy wool blanket around her shoulders. She clutched it to her chest, her eyes darting around the room like a cornered animal assessing its cage. "You're safe here," Ethan said quietly, crouching to meet her gaze. "No one's going to hurt you while you're under my roof." She opened her mouth, then closed it again, her lips trembling as though the words she wanted to speak were locked behind invisible chains. Finally, in a whisper so faint he had to lean forward to catch it, she said, "They'll come back for me." The rancher's jaw tightened. Whoever they were, they had left her stuff in a sack like discarded cargo, and now she feared their return. Ethan's fists curled at his sides. He had seen cruelty before, back in his younger days when greed and lawlessness had ruled the frontier towns. But to see it visit his quiet ranch felt personal, like evil had deliberately chosen to trespass on his solitude. He pulled up a chair across from her, resting his elbows on his knees. "Listen," he said, his voice low but steady. "I don't know who you are, and I don't know what trouble you're running from. But I do know this. No one lays a hand on you here, not while I'm breathing." Her eyes filled with tears, and she looked away, staring into the fire as if the flames could burn away the memories clawing at her. Minutes passed in silence, broken only by the crackle of wood and the faint whistle of the wind outside. Ethan studied her carefully. She was young, perhaps mid-20s, with dark hair matted from dirt and a face that would have been radiant were it not shadowed by suffering. There was a fragility about her, but also something unyielding, a strength hidden beneath layers of fear. At last, she drew a shaky breath and whispered her name. "Clara." Ethan nodded slowly, letting the name settle in his mind like the planting of a seed. "I'm Ethan." The exchange was simple, but in that lonely cabin it felt like the beginning of something heavy with meaning. Clara's eyes lingered on his, as if weighing the truth of his words, searching for any crack in his promise of safety. Finding none, she seemed to sag into the chair, her body surrendering to exhaustion. Ethan rose, fetched a tin cup of water from the shelf, and offered it to her. She drank greedily, drops spilling down her chin, and when she finished, a faint flush colored her pale cheeks. For the first time, Ethan caught a glimpse of the woman she might have been before fear had hollowed her, someone with laughter in her heart, perhaps dreams in her eyes. The sight stoked something in him, a protective fire that burned hotter than the flames in the hearth. Yet, alongside it grew questions he couldn't ignore. Who had done this to her? Why had they chosen his ranch as the place to discard her? And most pressing of all, were they truly coming back? He didn't want to frighten her further, but he needed answers if he was to keep her safe. "Clara," he said gently, "you don't have to tell me everything right now, but if there's danger coming this way, I need to be ready. Can you trust me enough to tell me what happened?" Her hands tightened around the blanket, her lips parted, but before she could speak, a sharp noise split the silence outside, the distant creak of wagon wheels rolling over gravel. Clara's face strained of color. She clutched Ethan's arm, her nails digging into his sleeve. "It's them," she gasped, her voice breaking. Ethan's heart slammed against his ribs. He strode to the window, peering into the night, and sure enough, lantern lights bobbed in the distance, growing nearer. A wagon, moving slow, deliberate, like hunters closing in on prey. Ethan reached for the rifle mounted above the door, the familiar weight steadying his nerves. He had lived alone for so long that he had forgotten what it meant to defend more than just himself, but now he understood it with a clarity that burned in his blood. Clara's life depended on him. He turned back to her, his eyes firm. "Stay here. Don't make a sound." She shook her head violently, tears spilling over her cheeks. "They'll take me again. They always find me broken bar." But Ethan silenced her with a steady hand on her shoulder. "Not this time," he said. His voice was a vow, carved out of stone. Outside, the wagon wheels groaned closer, and the night that had once been so quiet now bristled with menace. Ethan braced himself, knowing the storm was about to break at his doorstep, and for the first time in years, he was ready to fight, not for land, not for pride, but for someone who had whispered into the darkness for help, and found him. The wagon drew nearer, its wooden wheels grinding against the rocky soil, until the glow of its lantern spilled across the yard. Ethan pressed his back against the wall beside the window, careful to stay out of sight, though his sharp eyes tracked every flicker of light. Inside the cabin, Clara sat rigid, the blanket clutched to her chest like armor, her breaths shallow and quick. Ethan could almost feel her fear radiating across the room, each heartbeat echoing louder than the crackle of the fire. Through the glass, he caught sight of three figures. Two men sat on the wagon bench, broad-shouldered and rough-looking, their hats pulled low. A third walked ahead, carrying a lantern that swung from his hand with lazy confidence. They stopped at the gate to his property, the horses snorting as the reins were pulled taut. For a long moment, there was silence. Then a voice, deep and commanding, cut through the night. "Rancher, we know what you found. Hand her over, and we'll be on our way." Ethan's grip tightened around his rifle. His cabin had been a fortress of solitude for years, but now it was being tested by the very sort of men he despised, the kind who thought cruelty was their right, who treated human lives as possessions. He raised his voice, calm and steady. "You're not welcome here. Turn around while you can." The man chuckled, the sound harsh and grating. The one holding the lantern stepped closer, his shadow stretching long across the dirt. "Don't make this harder than it needs to be," he called out. "She belongs to us. You can't keep what ain't yours." At those words, Clara let out a strangled sob, her hand flying to her mouth to smother it. Ethan glanced back at her, his jaw set. In that instant, he knew there would be no compromise. These men hadn't come to negotiate, they had come to claim her like cattle, and no decent soul could allow it. He motioned for her to stay low, then eased the door open and stepped out into the night, his rifle resting easy in his hands. The air was crisp, the moon casting a cold, silver glow over the scene. The three men turned toward him, their smirks widening when they saw him standing alone. The leader, the one with the lantern, spat into the dirt. "One man, one gun. Brave, I'll give you that, but you're outnumbered, rancher." "Don't be a fool." Ethan didn't flinch. "I've lived too long alone to start fearing men like you," he replied. "She stays. You go." A tense silence stretched between them, thick as storm clouds before lightning. The horses pawed at the ground, their breath steaming in the chill air. Then, with the flick of his hand, the leader signaled the others forward. "Take him down." The two men on the wagon leapt off, their boots crunching on gravel as they advanced. Ethan's rifle came up smooth,